This is going to be a long one. I mean genuinely long. I've been writing and rewriting this post for 3 weeks because every time I think I've told you everything, I remember something else that matters. So get comfortable. Make tea. This is the story of my sister, my family, 10 years of being invisible, and the single most satisfying evening of my entire life. I'll start at the beginning, which in this case is a kitchen in suburban Atlanta in 1998, when I was 7 years old and my sister Vanessa was 9, and our mother looked at us both and made a decision about which one of us mattered more. She didn't say it out loud. She never had to. Every family with a golden child has its own specific logic for why that child was chosen. Sometimes it's the firstborn. Sometimes it's the son in a family that wanted one. Sometimes it's the prettier one, the louder one, the one who performed happiness most convincingly for relatives at Christmas. In our family, it was Vanessa, and the logic was this. Vanessa looked like our mother. That's it. That's the whole thing. My mother, Diane, was a beautiful woman in the specific Southern way that gets noticed and rewarded. Tall, blonde, high cheekbones. The kind of face that got her free things in restaurants and extra patience from customer service representatives, and a husband, my father Robert, who was decent and mild and slightly overwhelmed by her his entire life. Vanessa inherited all of it. I inherited my father's side. Dark hair, average height, a face that is perfectly fine and completely unremarkable, and has never once gotten me anything free in a restaurant. My mother loved me. I want to say that clearly because this story is not about a monster. It's about something more ordinary and in some ways more insidious than a monster. She loved me the way you love something you're responsible for. She loved Vanessa the way you love something you're proud of. The difference when you're 7 and then 10 and then 15 and you're living inside it every single day is enormous. Let me give you some specific examples, because I know how this sounds, and I want you to understand that I'm not a bitter woman constructing a narrative from grievances. I'm a 33-year-old project manager with a good life, and a therapist I see every other Tuesday, and I have done a great deal of work on understanding my family. What I'm telling you is simply what happened. Example 1. I was 8. I won a regional spelling competition at school, came first out of 62 kids, stood on a small stage and spelled asterisk, conscientious asterisk, and millennium and catastrophe, and received a ribbon and a certificate. My mother came to the competition. She took a photo. At dinner that evening, she mentioned it briefly and then spent the remainder of the meal talking about Vanessa's upcoming dance recital, the costumes for which she had been sewing by hand for 3 weeks. The certificate went on the refrigerator for 4 days and then disappeared. I don't know where it went. Example 2. I was 13. Vanessa, 15, had been caught by my father kissing a boy from her school in our backyard after curfew. This was not a serious offense by any reasonable measure. She was 15. It was a kiss. The boy was harmless. My father handled it quietly, a brief conversation, a slightly earlier curfew for 2 weeks. My mother's response to finding out was to spend an entire Saturday taking Vanessa shopping, to make sure she feels good about herself, she explained to my father, who nodded in the patient way he nodded at things that confused him. I watched them leave from my bedroom window. I had been grounded the previous month for coming home 40 minutes late from a friend's house and had not been taken shopping. Example 3 asterisk, and this is the one that I think shaped everything that followed. I was 17. I had applied, quietly and without telling many people because I had learned by then that my accomplishments functioned primarily as setups for conversations about Vanessa, to a summer academic program at Georgia Tech, a 6-week intensive for high school students interested in engineering and mathematics. Competitive. Prestigious. I got in. I told my parents at dinner. My father was genuinely delighted. He squeezed my shoulder and said he always knew I had it in me. My mother smiled and said that was wonderful and then said, "Vanessa, didn't you say you wanted to try that modeling agency in Buckhead this summer?" The conversation moved to the modeling agency. I attended the Georgia Tech program. It was the best 6 weeks of my adolescent life, not least because for the first time I was in a room full of people who found the things I found interesting, and nobody was comparing me to my sister. I came home with friendships I still have today and a clearer sense of who I was than I'd had before. Nobody asked about it much. Vanessa had not, in the end, pursued the modeling agency. I left for college at 18, and I want to tell you that I left and never looked back. But that would not be true. The truth is messier. The truth is that I went to Georgia State, 4 hours from home, and called my parents every Sunday, and came home for Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter, and watched from a manageable distance as the family dynamic continued to operate exactly as it always had, with Vanessa at the center and everyone else in orbit. Vanessa had become, by her early 20s, genuinely difficult to be around. This is not me being uncharitable. This is a woman who had been told her entire life that she was exceptional, and had therefore never developed the particular muscles that people who are not told they are exceptional are forced to develop. Resilience, empathy, the ability to tolerate being wrong. She was charming when things were going her way and vicious when they weren't. She borrowed money from our parents with the casual ease of someone who has never been told no, and the complete absence of any intention to repay it. She cycled through friendships at a pace that should have been alarming to my parents, but which they consistently explained away. She had also developed, and I say this as someone who observed it for years before I named it, a specific habit regarding me. Whenever I had something good happening, a promotion, a relationship, a trip, an achievement, Vanessa found a way to make it about herself. Not loudly, subtly, the way she had learned to do most things. My college graduation. She arrived an hour late in a dress that was, objectively, inappropriate for a daytime outdoor ceremony. And the photographs from that day are primarily of my mother fussing over Vanessa's sunburn, because she'd forgotten sunscreen. My first serious relationship, with a man named Derek whom I dated for 2 years. Vanessa told my mother within the first month that she'd heard from a friend of a friend that Derek had a reputation, and while she was probably wrong and didn't want to make trouble, she just thought my mother should know. There was no friend of a friend. There was no reputation. Derek was a perfectly good man who eventually ended the relationship, not because of anything Vanessa had said, but because my family dinners had become so tense and strange that he couldn't navigate them. He told me this very kindly. I have never entirely forgiven her for Derek. My promotion to senior project manager at 30. Vanessa, at the family dinner my mother threw to celebrate, spent 45 minutes telling a story about a job opportunity she had declined because she valued her freedom, and the evening ended with my mother consoling Vanessa about her career uncertainty while I sat at the other end of the table eating cake. I want to be precise about how this feels over years and decades. It doesn't feel like dramatic cruelty. It feels like a slow leak. Like something is being drained from you in amounts so small that you can't point to the moment it happened, only to the eventual emptiness. I had a good therapist by 30. Her name was Dr. Anand, and she had the specific gift of stating obvious things in ways that made them suddenly, devastatingly visible. She was the one who said to me, in our third session, "It sounds like you've spent a great deal of energy trying to be seen by people who have decided not to look." I cried for about 20 minutes after that session, sitting in my car in the parking garage, and then I drove home and I thought about it for a long time. Vanessa got engaged in January of last year. His name was Mitchell, And he was a corporate lawyer with a good salary and a large jaw, and the specific quality of very handsome, slightly dull men who have been told their whole lives that their handsomeness is a personality. He and Vanessa had been dating for 14 months, which in Vanessa's relationship history was something of a record. My mother was, to put it gently, beside herself with joy. The engagement party was held at my parents' house in March. It was a significant affair, 60 people, catered. My mother had hired an event planner named Tiffany who communicated primarily through exclamation points. The house was decorated with photographs of Vanessa and Mitchell at various attractive locations. There was a slideshow. There was a toast from my father that made my mother cry. There was a toast from my mother that made everyone cry, and also lasted 11 minutes, and mentioned me once, in passing, as our other daughter, Nora, who we're also very proud of. I smiled. I ate the very good catered food. I talked to relatives I see twice a year, and answered questions about my own life with the practiced brevity of someone who has learned that the questions are largely performative. And I noticed something. I noticed it the way I notice things at work when a project's numbers are slightly off. Not dramatically wrong, just wrong in a way that itches at the back of my brain until I figure out why. It was Mitchell. Specifically, it was the way Mitchell was behaving at his own engagement party. He was charming and sociable and said all the right things, and periodically he put his arm around Vanessa and smiled for photographs. But there were moments, small ones, the kind you only catch if you're watching carefully and not distracted by the slideshows and the toasts, where his attention drifted in a direction it shouldn't have drifted. Specifically, toward my cousin Amber. Amber is 27, 6 years younger than Vanessa, and she is the kind of effortlessly beautiful that doesn't know it's beautiful, which is the most disarming kind. She had come to the party with her boyfriend, a sweet, quiet man named Theo who spent most of the evening talking to my father about baseball. Amber was, as far as I could tell, entirely unaware of Mitchell's attention. She was just being herself. I filed it away. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't assume anything. I just noted it the way you note a number that doesn't quite fit and move on, but keep it somewhere accessible. The wedding planning began immediately and consumed my mother so completely that I began to wonder if she had secretly been planning it since Vanessa was born and was now simply executing a 30-year project. The venue was a historic plantation house outside Atlanta. I will not comment on this choice, booked for November, 10 months away. The dress was being custom made by a designer in Buckhead. The flowers were a subject of such passionate debate that my mother called me twice to discuss centerpiece options, which was twice more than she had called me to discuss anything about my life in the previous 6 months. I was asked to be a bridesmaid. Of course I was. I was the sister. I said yes. Of course I did. What else do you say? My dress was blush pink, which does nothing for my complexion, and cost $420, which I paid without complaint. Here is where I need to tell you about James. James was my boyfriend, and this is the part of the story that turned it from a family drama into something else entirely. I had been dating James for 8 months when the engagement was announced. He was a good man, genuinely good, the kind of good that is consistent and quiet and doesn't require an audience. He was a high school history teacher. He made excellent coffee and terrible jokes and had a dog named Biscuit who I loved almost unreasonably. We were serious. We were, in the private conversations you have when you're 32 and you've done enough living to know what you want, talking about the future in specific terms. I had introduced him to my family at Thanksgiving, 3 months before the engagement party. The introduction had gone, by my family's standards, fine. My father liked him immediately. My mother was polite. Vanessa had been, well, Vanessa had been Vanessa. She had spent most of Thanksgiving dinner asking James questions about his job with the specific tone of someone performing interest while conveying, through every micro-expression and follow-up question, that they find the subject faintly amusing. Teaching high school history. How wonderful. Did he find it fulfilling? Was it hard, being around teenagers all day? She imagined it must be exhausting. She said this with a smile that never reached her eyes. James, who was the most self-possessed person I'd ever met, answered every question with perfect good humor and seemed genuinely unbothered. Afterward, in the car home, he said, "Your sister is very good at being unpleasant in ways that are hard to prove." "Yes," I said, "welcome to my childhood." He squeezed my hand on the gear shift. "I see you," he said. "Just so you know, I see you completely." I know this sounds small. It was not small. 4 months after the engagement party, in July, James and I got engaged. He proposed at the restaurant where we'd had our first date, with a ring he'd had made by a local jeweler, a simple thing with a blue sapphire that he'd chosen because he'd remembered, from a conversation 6 months earlier, that I'd once said I found diamonds a little boring. He had remembered. He had filed it away and acted on it 8 months later, and that, I think, is the best argument I can make for him as a person. I said yes, before he finished the sentence. I was happy. I was genuinely, quietly, fully happy in a way I hadn't been in a long time. I called my parents that evening. My father cried, which he does easily and without embarrassment, which is one of his best qualities. My mother said all the right things, congratulations. She was thrilled. She couldn't wait to meet, well, she'd already met James. She meant she couldn't wait to celebrate properly. Then she said, "We'll have to make sure it doesn't overlap with Vanessa's wedding planning. She's at such a crucial stage right now." There it was, right on schedule. I said of course, hung up, and sat with James on our couch with biscuit between us, and James poured Prosecco and we toasted, and I was happy. And I kept the other thing in a separate room in my head where I put things that I'm not ready to look at yet. In September, 2 months after my engagement, I found a wedding dress. I want to tell you about this dress because it matters to the story, and also because it was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen on my own body. I found it at a small bridal boutique in Decatur. Not a famous designer, not a Buckhead name, just a family-owned shop run by a Vietnamese-American woman named Lily who had been making wedding dresses for 20 years. The dress was ivory with a subtle blush undertone, fitted through the bodice, with a skirt that moved when I walked in a way that felt effortless. Simple. Mine. I bought it. I cried a little in the dressing room in the good way. I called James from the parking lot and he said, "Tell me everything," and I told him everything. I made the mistake, and I call it a mistake, though I understand why I did it. I was happy, and I had not yet fully learned the lesson that joy shared with the wrong person is joy halved, of texting Vanessa a photo. I sent her the photo because she was my sister, and she was getting married too, and in some still hopeful part of me I thought, maybe this is the thing. Maybe this is the moment where we become the kind of sisters who share things. She responded immediately, "OMG, so pretty, very classic." Classic, the pause before that word. The way *classic in Vanessa's vocabulary functioned as a synonym for *safe* and unexciting, and the choice someone makes when they're not quite brave enough to do something interesting. I had been fluent in Vanessa's language for 30 years. I knew what she meant. I put my phone down. I told myself it didn't matter. 3 weeks later, I got a call from my mother. My mother called to tell me that Vanessa had found a new dress. She'd had a change of heart about the custom Buckhead design. It wasn't feeling right, and she'd found something she absolutely loved. She was so excited. She described it. It was ivory, with a subtle blush undertone, fitted bodice, a skirt that moved when she walked. It was my dress. Not the same designer, not the exact same dress, but close enough that anyone at a wedding would see them side by side and think, one of these women copied the other. And since Vanessa's wedding was in November and mine was planned for the following April, it would appear, to anyone who didn't know the timeline, that I had copied my sister. I sat with this information for a very long time. My mother, who had called to share Vanessa's excitement, did not appear to register what she was telling me, or she registered it and chose not to acknowledge it. I have spent a year trying to decide which, and I still don't know. I said the dress sounded beautiful. I got off the phone. I called James. James was quiet for a moment. Then he said very carefully, "What do you want to do?" "I want to burn everything down," I said. "Okay," he said, "but let's think about how." This is when I started paying closer attention to Mitchell. I want to be clear about my motivations here, because I've thought about them a great deal and I want to be honest. I was not looking for ammunition. I was not planning anything. I was simply angry and alert in the way that anger makes you alert, and paying attention in a way I hadn't been before. I had coffee with Amber in October. She was in Atlanta for a work trip, and we'd always gotten along well, Amber and I. She was one of the few family members who asked about my life and actually listened to the answer. We met at a place in Midtown and talked for 2 hours, and at the end, when we were putting on our coats, Amber said something that she said casually, but which landed with the weight of something she'd been holding for a while. "Can I ask you something weird?" "Always," I said. "Does Mitchell seem okay to you? Like, is he, I don't know, he texted me a few times over the summer, just like, 'How are you doing?' kind of stuff, which is probably nothing, but it felt a little." She stopped. I didn't respond after the second one, but it felt a little off. I looked at her. "Show me," I said. She showed me. It was 3 texts spread over 6 weeks from July to August. They were not explicit. They were not even definitively inappropriate. They were the kind of messages that are specifically calibrated to be deniable. Asterisk, "Hey, hope your summer's going well. You seemed great at the engagement party. Let me know if you're ever in Atlanta." But which, in context, in the specific context of a recently engaged man texting his fiancé's younger cousin for no clear reason, were unmistakably what they were. Amber looked at me. "Should I tell Vanessa?" I thought about it. "Not yet," I said. "Let me think." I went home, and I told James everything. James listened to all of it, the dress, Mitchell, Amber, the texts. And when I finished, he looked at me with that steady, clear-eyed way he had and said, "So you have a choice. You can do nothing. You can tell Vanessa privately about Mitchell, or you can wait and see." Wait and see what? Whether he does it again, whether there's more, whether the situation resolves itself or escalates. You think it'll escalate. I think men who text their fiancé's cousin 3 times in 6 weeks don't usually stop at 3 texts, James said. He said it without judgment, as a simple observation, the way he said most things. He was right. Mitchell's bachelor party was in Las Vegas in October, 3 weeks before the wedding. I know this because my mother talked about it with the mildly anxious energy she reserved for situations she couldn't control, asking Vanessa repeatedly whether she'd spoken to Mitchell about, well, you know, making sure he understood. Vanessa had waved her off with the confidence of a woman who had never had reason to doubt that the world would arrange itself according to her preferences. I know what happened in Las Vegas because of Danny. Danny was one of Mitchell's groomsmen, a friend from law school, and he was dating a woman named Priya who was friends with my coworker Keisha. And Keisha, because she knew that Vanessa was my sister, and knew approximately 40% of the story, told me on a Monday morning in November with the careful, reluctant energy of someone delivering news they know they probably shouldn't but can't not. Mitchell had not been alone in Las Vegas. Not in the wild, general what happens in Vegas sense. Specifically, there had been a woman. There had been a hotel room. There had been, according to Danny, who had told Priya, who had told Keisha, a very uncomfortable Sunday morning conversation among the groomsmen about what had happened and whether it was the kind of thing that needed to be addressed before a wedding in 3 weeks. They had decided, as a group of men in their mid-30s who wanted to avoid conflict, that it did not need to be addressed. I sat at my desk for a very long time after Keisha told me this. Then I called Amber. I want to say something here for anyone who is reading this and thinking, why didn't you just tell Vanessa directly? The answer is complicated, and I've made my peace with it. The simple version is, I had tried telling Vanessa things directly before. About the dress. About Derek years ago I had eventually told her, after James pointed out that she'd done it deliberately, that I knew what she'd done and that it was cruel. She had denied it with such convincing emotion that my mother had ended up consoling Vanessa about my accusations. About a dozen smaller things over 30 years. Vanessa was extraordinarily good at reframing, at making the problem about the messenger. At mobilizing my mother's sympathy so efficiently that the original issue disappeared entirely. If I told Vanessa about Mitchell, one of two things would happen. She would not believe me. She would accuse me of jealousy, of trying to ruin her wedding, of never being able to stand her happiness, and I would lose, and the wedding would proceed, and I would be the villain. Or she would believe me eventually, and she would fall apart, and my mother would spend the rest of our lives reminding me of the pain I had caused. I had tried playing this game by the rules. The rules didn't work in my favor, so I decided to change the game. Vanessa's bridal shower was the first weekend in November, 2 weeks before the wedding. It was held at a restaurant in Buckhead, private room, 40 women, a level of floral arrangement that suggested a budget I preferred not to calculate. I was there, in my role as bridesmaid, wearing a dusty rose wrap dress my mother had suggested and smiling with the practiced ease of a woman who has been smiling at things she didn't feel like smiling at for 30 years. Amber was there too. We had talked, Amber and I, at length and carefully. I had told her everything I knew. I had shown her the information from Keisha, the name of the woman in Las Vegas, the timeline. Amber had been quiet for a long time on the phone. Then she said, I want her to know. I just don't want to be the one who looks like they're doing it for the wrong reasons. You're not, I said. But she'll think I am. Not, I said, if she hears it from enough people at the same time to understand that it's real. A pause. What are you planning? Amber said. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. Then, okay, she said, I'm in. The shower ran its course. There were mimosas and a brunch menu, and a game where everyone wrote marriage advice on cards, and a gift opening portion that lasted 45 minutes because Vanessa opened gifts the way she did everything. Slowly, thoroughly, making sure the room was watching. I had been very specific with the timing. I had spoken to Keisha, who had spoken to Priya, who had spoken to Danny, and Danny, who had, in the 3 weeks since Vegas, developed a significant case of conscience, partly out of genuine guilt and partly, I suspected, because he had a fiancé of his own and the proximity to what Mitchell had done was making him uncomfortable, had agreed to send the information where it needed to go. Specifically, he had sent a message to 3 people. One was Vanessa's best friend, a woman named Courtney who was also at the shower. One was Mitchell's mother, Barbara, who was not at the shower but who was, I had learned through careful background research, a woman of strong opinions and stronger loyalty to the concept of honesty in marriage, possibly because Vanessa's future father-in-law had himself not been entirely faithful 20 years ago. And one was to Vanessa directly, 15 minutes before the gift-opening portion of the shower ended. The message was simple. It contained the name of the woman. It contained the hotel. It contained the date. It contained a photo, not of anything explicit. Danny wasn't that kind of man, but of Mitchell's hotel key card on the nightstand of a room that was not the room he'd been assigned. A photo that had apparently been taken by accident and had sat in Danny's phone for 3 weeks like a small conscience made of pixels. I did not send the message. Danny sent the message from his own phone because Danny had decided on his own, with a push I had provided through 3 degrees of connection, that this was the right thing to do. I was simply there when it landed. I watched Vanessa's face change. She was in the middle of opening a KitchenAid stand mixer, cream-colored, her registry, when her phone lit up on the table beside her. She glanced at it the way you glance at your phone when you're in the middle of something and expect to look later. And then something in the glance changed, and she looked again fully. I was watching. Amber was watching. Courtney, who had received her own message 30 seconds earlier, was watching from across the table with an expression that was composed and careful and very, very sorry. Vanessa put the KitchenAid box down. The room had not quite realized yet. There was still the ambient sound of a bridal shower, champagne glasses, the scrape of chairs, someone asking about the next game. And then Vanessa stood up. She did it quietly, which surprised me. I had prepared myself for the version of Vanessa who performs, who turns private pain into public theater, who has always been at her most dangerous when she has an audience. Instead, she stood up and she said very quietly to Courtney, "You got it too." Courtney nodded. Vanessa nodded back. She looked at the room, at the 40 women who were now watching her in the way that people watch someone they can see is about to come undone. Her eyes found mine. They stayed there for a moment. I did not look away. I did not smile. I looked back at her with the steady, clear expression of someone who has been patient for a very long time. Then she looked away. She said to the room, with a composure that I will give her full credit for because it took genuine will, "I'm sorry, everyone. I need to make a phone call. Please keep eating." She walked out of the private room. She was on the phone before the door closed. Through the glass panel in the door, I watched her talk, and I watched Mitchell's mother Barbara arrive. She had been waiting in the main restaurant, having received her own message and driven 40 minutes to be there because Barbara was exactly the kind of woman I had believed her to be. And I watched the 2 of them stand in the hallway of a Buckhead restaurant, and I watched Vanessa's composure finally, completely break. The wedding was called off 4 days later. This is the part people always want to know about, and I'll tell it plainly. Mitchell did not deny it. He tried, initially, the way men try when they think denial might still work, but Barbara was in the room and Barbara had raised Mitchell and Barbara knew, apparently, every tell he'd had since childhood, and the denial lasted about 8 minutes before he sat down and told Vanessa the truth. The truth was worse than Las Vegas. There had been other times earlier. Not Amber, he had not acted on whatever that had been, and Amber I believe entirely, but other women, other cities, other hotel rooms. He had been, as it turned out, someone who had become skilled at maintaining parallel lives, and the engagement had been, for him, less a declaration of love than a strategic decision about the next stage of his life. I know this because Vanessa told me. She called me 2 days after the shower, and it was the longest phone call we had had in 10 years, and she said a great many things, and I said some of them back. And I do not know if we will ever be what sisters are supposed to be, but we were, for 90 minutes on a Wednesday evening, completely honest with each other in a way we had never been before. She did not ask me directly if I had orchestrated it. I did not tell her. What I said was, "You deserve to know before you married him." She was quiet for a moment. "Why didn't you just tell me?" she said. "You wouldn't have believed me," I said. "You know that." Another silence, longer. "Yeah," she said finally, "I know that." My mother's reaction was, predictably, to grieve the wedding rather than celebrate the escape. She spent 2 weeks calling relatives and managing the fallout and returning deposits, and she was, I will say, genuinely devastated, because she had loved the idea of that wedding the way she had always loved Vanessa's life, as a reflection of something she wanted for herself. The loss was real for her. She called me once in those 2 weeks. She said, in a tone I recognized, the tone that had accompanied 3 decades of moments like these, "I just wish someone had found out sooner, before all this planning." Someone found out. I breathed through it, I said. "I'm sorry, Mom, I know it's hard." I did not say. Someone did find out. Someone found out and made sure it happened in a room full of people, because she knew that was the only way it would be real. I did not say it because I had stopped, a long time ago, needing her to see it. James and I got married in April. Small ceremony. 22 people. A venue that was not a historic plantation house. A rooftop garden on a building in Decatur that had a view of the city and string lights, and a caterer who made the best jerk chicken I have ever eaten in my life. My dress was ivory with a subtle blush undertone, and a skirt that moved when I walked, and it was mine, entirely mine, and nobody was wearing anything like it. My father walked me down the aisle and cried, which he does, which I love about him. My mother sat in the front row and was gracious and present in the way she is when she is trying, and she was trying, and I appreciated it. Vanessa came. I had not been certain she would, but she came, and she wore a green dress that was entirely her own choice, and she sat next to Amber, and they talked during the reception with the ease of people finding a new configuration. She hugged me before she left. A real hug, not the performance of one. "You look beautiful," she said. "Thank you," I said. She pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were doing something complicated. "I know," she said quietly, "just that, I know." I looked at her. "Okay," I said. She nodded. She left. James appeared at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne and biscuit on a leash, because we had brought biscuit because of course we had, and the string lights were on, and the city was spread out below us, and everything was fine. More than fine. Everything added up.